You've heard the phrase carpe diem, seize the day. It's described as a category of poetry. Life is short, so live it up. My grandmother loved that phrase. I discovered it as an 18-year-old, first in the movie Dead Poets Society, and then soon after that as a freshman in college in poetry class. I thought it was a great phrase. As an 18-year-old, perfect, life is short, enjoy life. I now have permission from the classics. A few years later, I learned the quote from St. Augustine, love God and do what you will. I thought that was great too, get them all in. Obviously, we're going to have a grand old time with life. It doesn't take long, though, in discovering, perhaps in our own lives or in other people we know, that that's not exactly what carpe diem is all about. And it's definitely not what love God and do what you will was all about. It's not permission, if you will, to live the over-simple philosophy of if it feels good, do it. In fact, that approach to life often results in the opposite of what is sought. It results in restlessness and emptiness and unhappiness. The reality is, the basic message of Carpe Diem, the basic message of St. Augustine, love God and do what you will, is the message of God to all of us. God calls us to live life to the fullest. Now, this occurs when we take time to recognize our gifts and our talents and learn who we truly are, and then live a life in such a way that we use those gifts and talents to make a difference, not only to ourselves, but to others. This is how we find joy and fulfillment. The joy and fulfillment we desire, the joy and fulfillment that God invites all of us to. St. Francis de Sales, in his great work, Introduction to the Devout Life, writes about this. And when you hear devotion in St. Francis's words, think faith in our modern use of that word. St. Francis writes, quote, Aristotle says that the bee sucks honey from flowers without damaging them, leaving them whole and fresh as it has found them. But true devotion does better still, for it not only hinders no manner of vocation or duty, but on the contrary, it adorns and beautifies all, close quote. He goes on to describe what life looks like when we take time to nurture faith in our lives. He writes, quote, family duties are lighter, married love truer, service to our king or citizenship more faithful, every kind of occupation more acceptable and better performed, close quote. This is what St. Paul is referring to when he tells us today, you are children of the light. He's calling us to live better, to live joy and peace and love. He's calling us to be true to ourselves as children of God, in whose image and likeness we have all been created. And this happens as a result of nurturing that gift of faith that God has given us. Last month, I was in Florida for a conference, and it was on stewardship, an approach of helping Christians live the gospel in daily lives. Stewardship is living life in thanksgiving to God. It's nothing new there. We are a quote-unquote Eucharistic people, translates a people of thanksgiving. And this thanksgiving is expressed in our prayer, in our worship, and in our offering of time and treasure and talent. In writing on stewardship back in the 90s, the U.S. bishops wrote, quote, as Christian stewards, we receive God's gifts gratefully, cultivate them responsibly, share them lovingly, and return them with increase to the Lord. I'm going to repeat that. As Christian stewards, we receive God's gifts gratefully, cultivate them responsibly, share them lovingly, and return them with increase to the Lord. perfect summary of today's parable of the talents, don't you think? John Paul II told us that baptism, which begins our life as Christians in a very special, unique relationship with the Lord, creates the capacity for belief within us. But it remains up to us as to whether we use that capacity, whether we nurture that gift that has been given to us. And if we don't, baptism is not going to make any difference to us or to anybody else. And so, we choose to accept faith. We choose to nurture it and to share it. 3 things necessary for us to live as Christian disciples: accepting faith, nurturing faith, and sharing faith. If any 3 of these are missing, the gift of faith makes no difference, and it's not possible to live life to the fullest as we seek. For the human person is a union of body and soul. Now, sometimes we can say, well, I don't need faith, I have the spirituality. There's this mistaken belief that we're talking about 2 separate things. Spirituality is an aspect of faith. Spirituality helps us recognize the intersection of the divine life with our own daily lives. Faith helps us to recognize that divine presence. Spirituality without faith, without nurturing one's relationship with God, results ultimately in a longing for completeness that remains just out of reach. Faith is the step stool, if you will, that helps us to grasp God's outstretched hand to us. Yet, we must care for this gift entrusted to us. We must take time to feed that faith through daily prayer and through our regular reception of the Eucharist. We must take time to come to a deeper knowledge and understanding of God, and in doing so, coming to a deeper understanding of ourselves. We must share the gift of faith with others. And we do so when we share faith in service to others, and in our interactions and conversations with others, and in our times of prayer with others. The parish, St. John the Evangelist, is where much of this occurs. It is meant to help us to live this nurturing, this learning, and this sharing in all the other aspects of our lives. It's not simply up to me or the staff to provide opportunities. This is a place where all of us, all who have been baptized, take responsibility for the care of our own faith and that of our family of faith. All of us here today need to work together to nourish faith, to learn more about it, and to share it with others. What we celebrate here this morning is meant to be lived throughout the week, for it is how we commit ourselves to Christ and how we seek to live life